Hi there, this is Brittany Antunes with Next Chapter Counseling. Today I'm going to explain a bit about EMDR for those of you who'd like to understand it a little better. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I'll get right to it. EMDR. It stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. A mouthful, but breaking it down some, we use eye movements or have your eyes follow something that goes back and forth to reprocess certain memories, which desensitizes you to them or reduces their emotional intensity. All right, so I'm going to explain what happens in the brain after we experience a trauma and what EMDR does to help heal or rewire that. So, for example, let's say that when you were 9 years old, you're going through a normal day at school. You went to recess, you went to lunch, you saw Sally, you saw Johnny, then you got your report card and it wasn't good. Your stomach drops knowing that you have to bring this home. You bring it home and mom or dad yells at you, maybe even shaking a finger of disapproval in your face. It feels awful. Their approval at this age is everything. It feels traumatic. You go to bed that night and you go through your sleep cycles, hitting your REM or rapid eye movement sleep cycle, which is where you process memories from the day. So your brain starts sorting out what happened that day and filing it away where it needs to go. It says, okay, we went to recess, that goes in the recess or fun file. We had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch, that goes in the lunch or the food file. We saw Johnny, we saw Sally, that goes in the friends file. We got a bad report card. We had to bring it home and we got in trouble. Our brain feels so overwhelmed with the emotion that it kind of flukes. I picture this part as if someone were carrying a file folder labeled report card incident and tripped, and all of the pieces of paper in it fell out and scattered everywhere or all over the brain, leaving fragments of the memory all over the place rather than in a nice, neat file like everything else from that day. Fast forwarding to later in life, maybe now, there are pieces of this memory sprinkled everywhere, which makes it so we can stumble upon those unexpectedly. So, a more literal example would be if in adulthood someone were to be yelling at you with their finger literally shaking in your face. That 9-year-old report card memory would be activated. Or let's say you have bad news to deliver to someone and your stomach drops. Your brain in the background says, this feels familiar, and could trigger that old memory. Sometimes it's something less obvious, like let's say the moment you were getting yelled at as a kid, there was a certain smell in the room, a breeze from the fan coming from the left, and some sort of commotion, something happening behind you. That same set of circumstances can also trigger this memory. Our body remembers that stuff. It holds on to that. Now, the craziest part is that if you were to be put in a brain scan and asked to recall that report card memory, your brain activity would look oddly similar to how it would present in the moment that it happened, which is so crazy if you think about that. This means that when we stumble upon these fragments of the memory, our brains aren't quite time oriented. It can get a little confused and actually feel like we felt at the time of the original event when it happened. So if you get yelled at by someone, it might feel bad in general, but it could also feel as intense as it did when you were 9 years old getting yelled at by your parent. This could explain a lot of the disproportionate feelings that we get confused about sometimes, because we may not be just responding to what's happening right now. There might be some old stuff that's being activated that feels very similar. So this is where EMDR comes in. With EMDR, we essentially grab all of those pieces of paper or all those fragments of the memory and we file them away into a folder so that you can access the parts of the memory when you choose to, but your brain doesn't really stumble upon it by accident. It knows that the past is actually in the past and doesn't get confused about what's old, what's something from the past, and what's actually happening right now. It also gets filed away with much less emotional intensity. So if you do choose to access it, it's not going to feel so painful or so tough to think about. How does it do that? I'm glad you asked. We essentially give your brain another opportunity to process the memory more effectively this time. This is where the word reprocessing comes in. We're not processing, we're reprocessing it for the second time. It didn't really get stored properly the very first time. We kind of mimic what your brain does naturally during those REM sleep cycles. If you've ever seen someone sleeping, but you can see their eyes are moving back and forth under their eyelids, well, we kind of do that, but you're awake, alert, and your eyes are open. So when your eyes look to the left, the right side of your brain is actually activated. And then the opposite, when they look to the right, the left side of your brain is activated. The left side of your brain is where all of the logic happens. I think of this as L, left for logic. It's where we think logically about things. We do risk analysis, we explore the odds of something happening, examine statistics, we find the words or language to put to something, we store and access facts, etc. Now the right side is more emotion heavy. It holds a lot of the emotional stuff. It has images, it holds pictures. It's where creativity lives and thrives. We have abstract thoughts here, etc. Now, during a trauma, the left side, the logic side of our brain is pretty much shut down. A brain scan would show very little activity here, while the right side of the brain, the emotion side, is highly activated. If we don't process a traumatic event effectively that night, especially if we've been drinking or on drugs or even just have a bad night's sleep, anything that makes us miss more REM sleep cycle opportunities, then it kind of stays locked or frozen in that lopsided way, with that left or logic being very low and the emotional intensity on the right side being very high, just locked and stored that way. So what we do with EMDR is pull up the bad memory and we tell the brain, okay, take two. Let's reprocess this. Let's try this again. We pull it up and have your eyes go back and forth, left and right. Logic, emotion, logic, emotion, logic, emotion, logic, emotion. And to the left, the logic is very high. This might be new thought processes, new perspectives, new beliefs about yourself, new beliefs about the situation, all sorts of stuff. Logic really high here, while the emotional intensity gets pretty much down to nothing, or at least significantly reduced to where you can think back to that memory and don't really have much of an emotional reaction or a body physical reaction to thinking about it. This files away the memory in that nice, neat file folder in a way that we can access it if needed and makes it possible to think about without being flooded with emotion. We remember it, but it's not as painful, and our brain knows that it's something from the past and that it's something that's not happening right now. Well, I hope that helped to paint a picture of how trauma is stored in the brain and how EMDR works to rewire and reorganize that.